Hi, everybody. This is Alex Lindsay from the Pixel Core, and this is part two of a three-part series on the road to 1080p, why we're choosing 1080p for MacBreak. So let's take a look at, we're going to talk about absolute resolution as well as color resolution, and this first image is the absolute resolution that we're working with. So you'll see we have standard. This is what we've been looking at for the last 50 years. So standard is approximately 720 by 480. So it is this image that you're looking at here. If you're doing widescreen, it's more like 720 by 360. So that's kind of what you're looking at here. And this is, you could have a big screen with a low resolution. It would just be softer. But what this really gives you is a representation of how many pixels are being used on your computer screen. And we think, of course, that the future is watching your images on either a computer screen or a portable player, that type of thing. So preferably an iPod, so because we are doing MacBreak, So that's what we're really looking at here. What we have is a standard definition, and then we have 720p. So 720p is kind of this in-between HD. It's used a lot for sports because some cameras like the Panasonic's VariCam can do 60 frames a second at 720p. So some people use it for that. It's used by a handful of networks. A lot of networks are now moving to what's called 1080p. 1080p means that it is 1080 pixels up and down, and it's actually 1920 across. So that's that's kind of the resolution, and that's the resolution we're working at now. One of the things you're going to see here, if we look at this, is you'll see this P. So what does that P stand for? Well, you can have an I or a P. You'll see the I a lot. And the difference is that interlace means that it basically takes this entire image here and breaks it up and basically scans every other line and then scans every other line in between that. So it's doing this 60 times a second if it's 30p or 30i, I'm sorry. And so that's how it's all written. So it's writing all of these one line at a time like this. Now the problem is that if something's moving a lot, it'll be here on one field and here on another, and you end up with this kind of jagged edge. If you ever see a jagged edge on your computer screen, that's the interlace, and that really makes our job a lot harder when we want to do green screen because now we don't have a clean edge to work with. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. There's no real reason for it. There is reason because TV is old-fashioned and they use this interlace stuff all the time. But there's no reason to use it on a computer. So 1080p is a much more 1080p or 720p or even 480p. The progressive scan makes everything much nicer. So that's part of what we're doing. So this is the overall resolutions, and this is what we're building for MacBreak. Now let's talk about color resolution, because color resolution is also important. Now here's a black and white image. Now why did we just go black and white? Well, the reason is that this is what, of course, TV used to look like. It was black and white, and they needed to add color to it, but they needed to do it in a way that didn't mess up all the black and white TVs that already existed. So they added a carrier signal on top of it with two color components. And what they ended up calling it, there's a lot of names for it, but generally what they called it was what we call it now is YUV. So now YUV, the Y, is Luma, and that is the black and white information. So what would happen is a black and white TV would only see this, while a color TV would see these extra pieces. Now, they had a problem with, you guessed it, bandwidth. And so they couldn't make these the same resolution as the Luma information over here. So what they had to do is they had to make that resolution a little bit smaller. And so what you end up with is a situation where when we talk about computers, we might have a series of pixels, let's say the black and white information, which is always, the black and white information, by the way, is always full resolution, or almost always full resolution. It's the color information that we tend to beat up. So what happens is you might have a bunch of pixels. So you might have a bunch of pixels here. Let's say 4 pixels. And instead of having a color for each one of these pixels, you might have color for only 2 of these pixels, or even color for all 4 of them. Just one piece of color for all 4 pixels of black and white. Now that may sound insane. How can you get away with that? But in reality, it actually works pretty well. Let me show you what I mean here. So I'm going to do something kind of funky where I'm going to blur the entire image. So we go into blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to turn it up. Now, it does exactly what you expect. 15 pixels of blur makes it look, blurry. But let's try something else. I'm just going to grab only the color information. So here are the two color channels. This is using Lab, which is very similar to YUV. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to only attack one of the color channels, but we're going to view all of the channels here. And we're going to do the same blur that we did before. So I'm going to do Gaussian blur here. And watch what happens as I turn this up. So now it's blurring. You can see it blurring here, but it's not really affecting it. Now you can start to see a little bit of an edge here that's happening, but that's at 60 pixels. At 15, everything looks pretty fine. The reason is that most of what we think of as sharp is actually very related to, and most of what we think of when we think of sharp is really related to the black and white information. It's not related to the color information in the image. Now, that's fine when we're looking at regular images. The problem is that we need that color information when we're actually doing keys. So if we want to remove this green, of course, we're identifying a color, and if that color is a lower resolution than the full image, then well, we have a problem. And this is where a little understanding of what TV is makes a difference. And so let's take a look at this. So if we go back here to color resolution, when we have what we call 444 color, we have, of course, as you would imagine, a pixel of color. So if we think about this again, 444 means that for every 4 pixels of Luma information, or in the Y information, we have 4 pixels of color, just as you would expect. Now, this seems simple, but it doesn't happen very often. When you're actually thinking about TV, most of TV works at what we call 422. So let's go back to our image here and give you an idea of what that means. 422 means that it's squashed like this. So your television image is coming through, and at 422, and this is basically essentially almost everything you see on TV, almost all video is shot at 422. All high-end video is shot at 422. Not everything. I mean, we have a camera that'll shoot better than that, but almost everything you see on TV is all shot this way. The black and white information comes in like this. Now, you don't see it this way, but the color information is coming like this. And what's happening right at the very end, of course, is this is getting stretched back out again. So if we take this image here and we stretch it, watch what happens. We take that half-res image and we stretch it out, well, it looks pretty good. Now, it happens to be half resolution, and there's going to be little edgings, and I'll show you that in a second. But that's actually happening when you're dealing with a 422 image. Now, it gets worse. When you're actually shooting on DV, your little DV camera shoots what we call 411. So let's escape out of this, and let's go into 411 here for a second. So here is what 411 looks like. So basically for every, now let's get back into this for just a second. If we think about this the way we were talking about it previously, so let's look at this again. For every 4 pixels of black and white information, you have 1 big pixel of color. Now, if we scale this as we did before, here you can see if I stretch this back out, once again, it's all going to work. So I'm actually going to be able to see all of my, my pixels again. But the issue that I'm getting into is you can start to see this little edging. And if you look at a green screen that's shot at 411, you're going to see this little edge starting to go down. That's because that color information is being stretched over the black and white information. So now this seems to work fine. I mean, it looks okay. Everything looks fine. But here's the problem. Let's go back and let's look at, let me get out of this, and let's look at the black and white information here. So I'm going to zoom in to Emery's hair. And this is looking at the resolution at what we call 444. Now, it's a little pixelated because I'm zoomed in like 300%. But let's look at what happens to that color information when we actually go to 422. Well, it drops. So before and after. So that color information is being stretched. It's being kind of beat up because we're going down to 422. So if we were shooting with a standard video camera, and if we were actually shooting with what's called an F900, the Sony Cine-Alta F900, this is the resolution that we'd be working at. And you can see the pixelation that's starting to happen. Now, if we were shooting on 411, which is what most people have to shoot with the little DV cameras, this is what we'd be getting. Now, that's just downright ugly. But this is why green screens are so hard to do. Now, we have some software. DV Garage makes some software called DV Matte that'll go through a lot of this and make it a lot better. But But generally, it's still going to be problematic. It's never going to be the same as if we get something like this. So that is something that, we have to kind of always take into account. In fact, if you really think about this, we're looking at 411, 422, and 444 at HD level. But really, if you were thinking about the image, this is what it would look like when you were dealing with, if you were actually dealing with standard definition. So you'd be ending up with a little image like this, and you'd be ending up with color information that looks like this. And anybody who's tried to use their little DV camera can kind of get a sense of how that works. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why we're working with 444 1080p, and that's why we think that MacBreak is going to look a lot better as we get better at it, as we build our pipeline. It's still a stretch for us because there's a lot of issues with dealing with that much data, but we think it's all worth it because of what we're doing here. So anyway, hopefully that helps. Coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about how we actually do all of this stuff. So we're going to talk about how we build the edits and also how we build these composites and how we build the digital mats. And that's all coming up in a couple days. So enjoy and stay tuned. A little bit later, we're almost to our first 1080p show.